So this is Edem. Can you also, in the same way, introduce yourself for those who have joined, and then we'll get into the questions.
Okay. So my name is Edem. I am from Ghana, but currently doing my PhD uh, in Canada, in the film and media department. My PhD really is looking at how marginalized people can use alternative media for activism. And I was looking before specifically at documentary filmmaking. But if there's anything that I've learned in graduate school is that your project can change, it keeps changing. If it's not changing, it means that you're not learning and you're not interacting with the things that you're coming in contact with. So it's an ever-changing project. Right now, I'm looking at specifically alternative media. And when I say alternative media, I'm looking at anything that's not mainstream or anything that's not legacy media. So a lot of it is very dependent on the internet. So that's really it. My master's thesis was on feminist documentary filmmaking in Ghana and how Ghanaian feminists have used documentary filmmaking for activism or to sort of initiate some conversations or social change. So I looked specifically at The Witches of Gambaga. If you haven't seen it, please go look for it. It's on YouTube. And I also looked at a very recent film, When Women Speak. So really I guess my field is media communications activism. I have to say that I also work with Fix the Country in different capacities. So when the 53 people who went to protest, a lot of them are my friends, got arrested. Myself, Andrea, and Tessa were sort of running things. So we were the ones running things in their absence. So that's kind of my my background, really, and that's just who I am.
And she's a fabulous person. Thank you very much. So yes, we're going to talk about the role of media and activism.
Yeah.
So again, I sent you a couple of questions. We're going to touch on those questions. I do have a couple of cheeky questions that I'm going to try and slide in there, but let's see how it goes.
Okay.
So the first question is, how do you think the media coverage has influenced public perception and action regarding issues such as galamsey, but also just kind of social issues? So like for example, when everyone was arrested, um, and all of those things, how do you think what role do you think the media is playing in educating the public um, about these issues?
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. I think I'm gonna go on and on. If I'm going off topic, please bring me back. I tend to do that a lot. Um but I think that we all as a people understand the role of the media in sustaining a democracy and in the distribution of information and that's why to a large extent we have actually come to call the media the fourth estate of the realm, as say to say that it's the sort of a fourth arm of government, to sort of cement its role in sustaining a democracy. And they have been uh sorry, I'm looking at the screen and seeing the questions. So I'm like a bit distracted, but that's fine. I will look at it later. But as I was saying, the media is very instrumental in every society. And that's why when coups happen, one of the first things that they do is to go, sort of seize the media, and that's how they broadcast that, okay, we're in charge now. It's that powerful. Um, when it comes to how they shape the things that we think about as a society, or um, even the way that we interact with each other, I think that um, we cannot also dispute that. Um, that is going specifically to uh I'm always going back to queer rights because that's also one of the things that I study. There's been numerous studies that says that the media has sort of been a huge part of invoking a moral panic. So they are very good at getting people or the entire society to think that, oh, something terrible is going to happen, and then everybody's up in arms. When it comes, however, to um, activism of this kind, um, the media seems to be lagging or not doing a lot of what they are supposed to, we want them to do. So, for example, when it came to the arrest of the 53 people, I don't live in Ghana, but I'm constantly talking to my siblings. And one of the things that my sister said to me is that the media, for example, was reporting it as if it was thugs, that were sort of just on the street, uncontrollable, blocking the street, and then, that report on um how do you call it? People losing their lives because they could not access the 37 hospital. I think a part of it is because like every aspect of our society, from Galamsey to whatever it is, the media space has now been in Ghana has now come to be dominated by politicians. Okay. So they get the number of licenses that had been issued to politicians in the last couple of years is mind-boggling. So they get the money, their party is in power, they get the license, they open radio stations and all of that. So, of course, if you're affiliated to a political party, a lot of the things that you're going to say is going to be either supportive of your political party, or if you're not in power, then it's going to criticize the party that is in power. So that has been some of the ways that, and even the ways that, monitoring from here, the headlines, the way that they frame the story. So they say democracy had protesters. If you say democracy had protesters, you're saying a group, it almost feels like a group of people or an organization that is doing this protest. Meanwhile, it's well-meaning Ghanaians that are hitting the streets to say that, you know what, we're tired of this Galamsey thing. It's destroying our water bodies. Is you know, babies are being born with deformities, our food and everything. And but then you frame it as democracy have protesters, and it's almost as if it's fitting into this narrative of thugs or a group of unruly people coming on the street to protest, right? And so this has been some of the ways that the media sort of has been framing the some of the um, conversations around how do you call it, advocacy for an end to galamsey and all of these things, and other social issues, I have to say.
Yeah, I think that you touched on, oh my God, so many key points there. The misinformation that tends to come from the media, in some ways, or even the lack of information. So as Edem said, we are both part of Fix the Country, and one of the things is that it's almost like they come to us for information and then choose and then edit that information to then put out to the public. There isn't necessarily um there isn't a due diligence that's
Right.
applied.
I, I did, now that you mentioned that, I did want to also touch on the way that it's structured. Some of it is that journalists are overworked and underpaid, right? There's no job. I used to work in a media house, and I don't want to go into the details of that, but you're overworked, you can be called to come to work at any point, at any time, and expected to deliver. And this is not me making an excuse for a journalist, because I think that, as you know, if you sign up to be a journalist, it's like signing up to be a doctor. Um, when there's an emergency and you are needed, you should go, but it doesn't mean you should not do your job. Um, but then it adds to this thing of, I don't know if you know about armchair journalists, where they don't necessarily go out to investigate anything. It's just sitting at the office, there's a phone. Oh, I have this person's contact, and just calling the person and saying and asking them one or two questions and writing the story based on what the person has said. And so you realize that even in the news that we consume, there's except a few people like Eras, who recently was doing a Galamsey documentary, but was even beaten up, except for a few people who go on the grounds and do groundwork. And this is also a problem because how do you call it? Media houses are not investing as much in correspondence. So everything is centralized, based in Accra, as if everything is happening in Accra, but then they're not investing in correspondent as much as they are investing in their, the people that they work with in Accra to go and do groundwork. A lot of our media is, or the conversations in the media or the news is based on uh this person said, that person said, and that's the end of it. So the police releases as arrests. We saw that last year when the BBC journalist got arrested, for example, and the police said, "Oh, we did not arrest any journalist," and then they reported, only for the journalist himself to come out to say that I was arrested and I was assaulted. So they're not doing very much besides sitting somewhere and going to and calling people to report. Beyond that, also, our news is dominated by event, going to event, covering the event and reporting, because it's like, you know, it goes back to journalists being underpaid. Okay, because there's something, I don't know how many of you have heard about Sole and solidarity. So the more events you can go to as a journalist. So usually when you go for events, event organizers usually put money in envelopes and hand it over to the journalists, right? So the more events you're able to, so if you're if an underpaid journalist, for example, the more events you go to and report on it, the more money you get, because you're going to, say you're going for 10 events in a week, and every event organizer is giving you 100 CDs. That's 1,000 CDs. Uh, Correct me if I'm wrong, because my math can be terrible, but that's 1,000 CDs in a week, right? So you're motivated to do more of that work rather than doing work that is necessarily impactful, that contributes the way that it should to the democracy. Beyond that, going back to the first point that I mentioned about politicians acquiring media houses, a lot of, well, let me not say a lot of, but we have some influential journalists who also have politicians as godfathers. Okay. So in that case, if your party is in power or whatever, and also they don't want to offend politicians, because everybody is checking my pocket. What if this politician, the closer I get to this person, or even sometimes it's not even about how, it's not even about money, it's also about access and money, right? So if every Ghanaian, if you go to, if there are issues with a hospital, so that if I got sick and I couldn't get a bed to be treated, maybe if I'm close to a politician, if I went to the hospital and would call the politician, they'll be able to treat me, right? So there are all these issues that is sort of preventing a journalist from sort of doing the work that they're actually supposed to do. And I think it goes back to the baseline of um structures, resources, that are, um unavailable. And when it comes, I know there's a question about misinformation and disinformation. I don't know if you want to ask me that, or I don't know if you want me to just go ahead and respond to that question.
Um, yeah, do you know what? You've given me a term. I'm going to use this term now. I feel like what a common theme across what's come up so far. I'm going to call it weaponized poverty. There seems to be this um, trait, or what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the right word, but there seems to be this thing where if we keep people at a general low level of income and general, like just on the cusp of
Mhm.
poverty, then we can kind of control what they do. And even it kind of spiraling into journalism and media is quite interesting. What was the question that you wanted to address?
The question about disinformation and misinformation.
Um, yeah, let's come back to that one because I think
Okay.
I want to combine that with the legal
Okay.
aspect. So we'll come back to that. Sorry, I've just lost my page. Yes. So the other question. So we're looking at it from the media and now activism. So what challenges do you think activists face when trying to engage in advocacy? And do you have any ideas on how we can overcome?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Sorry, what challenges are activists facing when it comes to trying to engage in advocacy, and how what do you think can be done about them? I mean,
Uh,
I think that what do you think can be done about it is probably more of an open question, but give us an insight into some of the challenges that um, are being faced by activists.
I think, you know, I don't know if you have, I don't know how many of you have followed. I was looking into the chat box. There are so many questions from here. I hope I'm able to respond to some of them. But I don't know how many of you followed the recent arrest of um, the 53 uh persons. I know Tessa is on this call, and Andrew, there's you. So we probably know some of the things beyond, what has been shared on social media. But there's a lot of cost involved, and I'm actually thinking about this for part of my thesis, which was not originally part, but to be honest about the cost of activism to people who are activists, and not just them, but even their loved ones, friends, families, because part of it is also mental, right? Um, for the 53 people who were arrested that we've had to deal with, for example, there's been job losses because they were behind bars for 3 weeks. And um, the state doesn't feed you when you are in police custody. And so we found out people were where people were, because the police also refused to tell us where people were. And then when we found where people were, they changed their locations. So we're constantly trying to figure out where people were, and found out people where people were after 10 days. So it means they had not eaten, in that 10 days. Not to talk about the physical assaults that they suffer in the hands of the police. So we saw, for example, that Oliver, for example, had been brutalized. He wasn't the only one that had been brutalized. Even in the cells, people who have been taken in police custody who are also in the cells brutalize people who are brought in. So there are all of these things that happen. But there's also when you lose your job, you're also losing your source of income. So if you're a breadwinner, then it's worse. Beyond that, there's also the risk of actually not being employed, because when people find that you do this kind of work, well, maybe you're going to be arrested again and be gone for 2 weeks or something like that. But also, people don't want to generally offend politicians, right? So if you're affiliated with this group and you're working with us, then there's that conflict. And I think one of the things that we always talk about, the tangibles, loss of jobs and all of that. But one of the things that we may not necessarily be paying attention to is mental health. I was not arrested, but having to do this work while all of the people had been detained took a huge toll on my mental health that I am still recovering from up until till now. So like sometimes I go off and I know it's related to having to do this work long term, like deprived sleep, because I'm in a different time zone from Ghana. I'm 4 hours now, 5 hours behind. So by the time we have all the conversations for the day and say, okay, we're done for the day and I will be going to bed, that's when Ghana is waking up, and then my phone is buzzing or my phone is ringing. So you're not having enough sleep, and it does affect your mental health. The stories that colleagues have shared with us, people that we've had to send, low income households, and that we've had to fundraise and send monies to, and all of that. It takes the stories that you hear, it takes a toll on you. You might not know it in the moment, but then when things simmer down a bit, it hits you that you've been going nonstop for all this while. And I don't know if I'm allowed to disclose this, but even within ourselves, we have a platform that we organize on. It's like, since this everybody sort of is on edge, right? The slightest thing, people get upset. And we may not have talked about it that way, but I think it's related to the trauma so that's me who was not arrested. So imagine the people who got arrested and had to spend that number of time, amount of time and number of days in police custody without knowing if somebody was coming for them, or if the they were going to make any progress with this case, right? So these are some of the costs that's associated with activism, and this is the people that are actively involved in the activism. Think about their loved ones, not hearing from maybe your partner or your sibling for a number of days, and not knowing where they are, if they are usually are people who you are constantly talking to. Imagine for the man Emmanuel, who was not necessarily a protester, but who had been picked up by the police anyways, and whose wife had just given birth, in the hospital. It's a lot for not only just the people that are involved, but also their close ties and associations. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very, very key points there. That those 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks was insane. And
It
I'm
was
not
more
in
than
Ghana
4 weeks.
either. I'm in the UK, and I felt for Edem and her time zone. But even with me, so like I said, my daughter's only 5 months old. And when my mum was here, it was much easier to kind of try and coordinate things, because obviously my daughter has what she needs. But when my mum wasn't here, trying to organize certain things, I almost felt like I was neglecting my daughter for like that whole time. And it makes me quite emotional when I talk about it, because if you know me, I'm very passionate about child development and all of those things. And that's where my expertise lies. So it's almost like having my daughter laying in the bed next to me, and she's sort of, like, I'm feeding her and everything else, don't get me wrong, but not being able to interact with her the way that I would normally, because we're dealing with this issue, and then we find out that actually so and so and so has been moved to um this jail that
Yeah.
nobody's told us, and these people have been split up, and then all of a sudden there's like a whole other person that we didn't even know had been arrested like 4 days later, and therefore they haven't been fed for 4 days. But again, we're not even experiencing these things. So we're like the coordinators, not even in the country, right, in the background. And it is quite taxing, and I think it's quite frustrating also, because people then say, oh, you guys are just collecting money from this political party or this opposition party, and I can tell you for free, no one ain't giving me no money. um so
Oh
yeah,
my,
it's very,
there's so
very,
many questions for me that I'm
I
tempted to.
know, I know, I'm coming. So let's do the other two questions, and then you can pick two questions, and then we're going to go to
Oh,
Oliver, and then we'll come back and have the broad discussion, because yeah. um um Okay, so I mean, this question, I guess, is actually similar to one of the questions that's in the chat, which is, how can media outlets counteract misinformation and gain control over the narrative?
I think, sometimes I think it's simple because we should know, but then I, so You see, I think we need to do due diligence, you know, and put emphasis on fact, okay, rather than speed, especially in this day and age of social media and, monetized social media platforms of media organizations and all of that. I think it all contributes. Who's first to break the news and not necessarily who is in fact, who has in fact um gone behind, face value to do a bit more digging to ensure that is this factual, is what we're publishing factual. I think that in the past, that sort of used to be the case, I would like to say. I could be naive, but in this day and age, because of the number of views, or the number of people going onto my site who broke the news first and all of that, we're not exactly doing due diligence because we want to be the first to break it. And when you emphasize speed rather than fact checking and all of that, you leave a lot of room for errors. So I think one of the things we should be doing is to put emphasis on getting um fact checking and doing multiple fact checking. Again, in this day and age of um misinformation, you're a media house, you're a journalist, you're not a blog, even bloggers, you're not just a blogger or something like that, or you're not a social media influencer or something of that sort. I'm not saying this to exonerate social media influencers or all of that, but there's a reason that you're called a journalist and not a social media influencer, right? Because you're supposed to go beyond what everybody is seeing, or what everybody is reporting, because there's been numerous accounts of people saying A, journalists saying A, when it's B, and they come back later to say, oh, it's B, but then people have already run with point A. So I think that's something to look at. Media houses should also be looking at having um fact checkers, like people who are actual, because these days people are trained in fact checking, you know, people who are actual fact checkers to work with them in the media houses. So that's not just journalism reporting, but then you actually also have people who have these skills, who can actually do whatever tools they have available to them to do um um the fact checking. So I think these are I think fact checking, and emphasis on um no, not speed, but rather getting it right. Do you see what I mean? Yeah.
Fabulous. Okay. So my last question, which I think we can maybe skip it because I know you're eager to answer some of those questions. Or should we?
What's the last question? Maybe we should.
Can you share examples where media-driven activism has successfully led to tangible change?
Oh, so I think that with in Ghana, I have an example of. And I would not say just the media, but the media and the upper middle class people in society. Because like there are numerous examples from all over the world when there's been a team up and things have worked. So with the Arab Spring, for example, we talk about in this context, we talk about protests that have happened um in China, for example, the umbrella movement, where a lot of it was also because the middle class, played a significant role. So all these protests may have initially been started by lower class people in the lower class, but then as soon as the middle upper class people add their voices to it, then it becomes this huge thing that the people in power cannot necessarily ignore, right? And these voices have been also been amplified by the media. In the Ghanaian context, for example, before this new wave of Stop Galamsey Now. In 2017, there was a media coalition for media coalition against Galamsey that was formed, that I think was spearheaded by City FM, and they did this. I would like to call it a protest, because there was a protest against illegal mining, and that was, led by the media. So you see the media aggressively reporting on on Galamsey, making posters and flyers, distributing it in traffic. Like, they did a lot of work. And what we saw, Daryl, please correct me if I'm wrong, but there were moments in time when the government actually responded, and there were times, I think there was a ban on Galamsey for a certain period of time. And then once the media took their eyes off of that, then it's like, oh, now we have a chance to do whatever we want, because the media is not watching anymore, right? There's a reason they're called a watchdog, because once they have their eyes on something, then it means that they're not taking their eyes off people. The people in power are forced to act. I remember, there's also this incident of when the how do you call it, a journalist was assaulted by uh a known supporter of the ruling government. And what media houses did and journalists did is that if you don't apologize, I think they laid out a couple of things for the party to do. If you don't do A, B, C, and D, we're not reporting on you anymore. And immediately they came to apologize. So there are examples of the media saying that, putting their foot on the ground and saying that if you don't do this, then we're also not going to do this. And then you know that these people in power know that they also need the media, right? So I think that the media has to there has to be this relationship. Someone just put in the comment, Haja Fatih and Techua of Adom FM. That's that case. So we need to work, and this is me responding to a question about civil society or something like that in the comment. We need to work together as a people. And I guess this is where the diasporan aspect comes in. When the 53 got, I'm going back to the 53 because it's a very recent example. When people are we are in the diaspora, the people on the ground, how can we work together along with the media, but then also people of every class to get things done? There's actually also an example of drop that chamber, when Ghana's parliament, in the midst of all these economic crises, decided that they had money to build a bigger parliamentary space. It was the should I say, middle and upper class Ghanaians that came together, wrote a petition, did a social media protest, and eventually Parliament decided that because oftentimes if it's just the lower class that's agitated about something, they don't care, right? But then if you have people from the middle and the upper class saying, as for this one, yeah, no, 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 then they sit up